When a man won a spot on a TV show, he had no idea that he would be fighting to survive for the next 15 months. Not only was he unaware he was being live streamed to 17 million people each week, he was forced to be naked on camera eating raw dog food in order to not starve to death while he slowly went mad. When he believed he was finally free, he would be kidnapped, taken to another country, and manipulated into continuing the show. After the show, he was no longer the same joyful comedian. He was a survivor. You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Makenna, and today's case is about a Hulu documentary that came out last year, I believe, called The Contestant. And this was released to share this contestant's side of the story for the first time ever, what he endured on this show. And he was not the only one who had to endure far more than what was appropriate for a show. So we're going to dive into the history of this Japanese TV show, which has been revealed as the beginning of reality TV, and how not much has changed in regards to the emotional and physical health of these contestants being cared for during the shows and afterwards. So let's go ahead and get into the story, but first I want to thank our sponsor, Upside. They give you cash back on purchases like gas, groceries, restaurants. With over 100,000 locations you can search for in your area to decide which one works best for you. All you have to do is find the location you want, claim the offer, and pay like usual, and then follow the steps in the app to get paid real cash back. It's as simple as that, and it's been a must for me with these crazy gas prices to feel like I'm actually getting something back when I come and get gas. I no longer go to just random gas stations. I find the gas station with the best deal, the best cash back per gallon, and I go there. Top Upside earners are earning as much as $300 a month. So if you want to see how much you can earn, click the link down below in my description to download Upside, and you can use code Brooke Mckenna to get an extra 25 cents cash back per gallon on your first tank of gas. Or you can use the QR code on the screen. Now let's get back to the story. In 1998, Japan was believed to air what was the first reality show in the world. This was called Denpa Shonen, which meant do not proceed crazy youth. Now, Denpa means radio waves, and the show kind of referenced how some mentally insane people had claimed they were being controlled by radio waves. Basically, this was a human experiment in a TV show, and Japanese producers were looking for people who were trying to be famous and not succeeding, and so they were willing to do whatever it took to get there. Most who applied to the show were unknown comedians who wanted an audience. So once these applications were sent in, one person was randomly selected, or a few people, through a lottery system, and they were not told what this challenge was going to be ahead of time. These challenges were known to be extreme situations, sometimes called sadistic, due to the producers changing the rules if the participants were succeeding in their challenges. So this challenge survival show was aired on Nippon TV network, and this human experiment was said to be torturous. Now, there was an original host of the show, and his name was Kunihiro, and he was a comedian and also an impressionist, and so while he was hosting, most of his jokes referred to his weight, and this would come to haunt him later on in the show. But he continued to host for most of the seasons, and every season there was a new challenge with new contestants. Now, one season was deemed Desert Island Escape, and 2 contestants were selected and placed on a deserted island with no food, no way home. They didn't know where they were, and all they were told is that they had to build a raft and reach Tokyo, and that is when they were finished. Now, 4 months on this deserted island, they finally made it to Tokyo. They had escaped. However, at this point, the producers would then give them a swan-shaped paddle boat and inform them that their challenge wasn't over. These exhausted survivors now needed to take this boat to go from India to Indonesia, all to continue filming this TV show because the ratings were good and people enjoyed watching them. Another season was titled The Vertical Africa Europe Continental Hitchhike, and this involved a comedian named Takashi and a radio DJ called Suchuan. Now, they were to hitchhike from the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa to Nordkapp in Norway. This was a 250-hour journey by car. However, they would not be given a car. One long-distance hiker named Thera Abud planned this hike and estimated that it would take 3 years. and these contestants were forbidden to use any money for gas, food, or shelter. So they hiked through these harsh weather conditions, sometimes without food and water for days. And while in the Sahara Desert, the comedian Takashi collapsed and had to be taken to the hospital for treatment. Another season was regarded as the pennant race, and it seemed fair enough. Contestants would be confined to a room with a TV that showed only their favorite baseball teams playing, and their face would be hidden from the view of the camera. So the producers picked 3 different fans of Central League teams and placed them in separate rooms. However, they soon learned they would only be fed if their certain team won. While the winners would be fed and they were eating, a little bit of their face would be shown to the audience, because remember, the whole point of this show, why people were applying, was to get exposure to different audiences. So they would get a little bit of their face exposed every time that the players won. However, the losers would be going hungry and would sit in the dark until the next game. Now, if one contestant's team was doing extremely well, winning continuously, they would be provided better food and their entire face would be shown to the audience. Another season, a duo called the Bloom of Youth, who were a Japanese pop group, were cast on the show and told that they would need to travel across Russia using the Trans-Siberian Railway. This took 7 months, and the only way to pay for these travels was by playing street concerts, since they were this band. So the group decided that the best way to renew interest in their band was to go on this show. They were dropped by their record label. They had very poor sales, and so they were trying to gain back an audience. So this duo traveled for 7 months, and they knew at the end they would have to compose a good song, and they would have an ultimatum. They had either had to gain enough attention from this show to gather 10,000 people for a concert, or if not enough people showed up, they would break up and quit their singing careers altogether. Now, as they arrived at an indoor arena to play their newly composed song Last Tour, more than 10,000 people arrived from the show. In fact, there was so much support that the duo was asked to do an encore performance. This was one of the happier outcomes from the show. It definitely did gain attention for these people, sometimes not in the best way though. However, the most popular contestant of the show is who we are focusing on. This was from a season called A Life in Prizes, and this was a man named Nasubi. Or rather, this is what he was deemed on the show. This was a word meaning eggplant, which will be explained soon enough as to why he was named this. But his popularity on the show was said to be due to the pure insanity that this torture had led him to. Nasubi was chosen as a contestant in 1998, and his challenge was to stay in an apartment in Japan. He would be naked and could only use the prizes that he won in sweepstakes to survive. Now, this seemed easier than some of the traveling challenges. However, it would soon be obvious that this man did not know that every one of his movements were being streamed live. Normally, this show did not air live, but for the next 15 months, the audience around Japan would see every moment of Nasubi's torture. Nasubi's real name was Tomoaki, and he was a comedian who had gone to comedy to protect himself when he was being bullied as a child. Due to his father's job, they moved around a lot. He didn't have many friends, and so he realized that the worst thing that bullies could do is make fun of his face. It was a longer face, and so they would call it gross, and he decided to use that to make them laugh instead. This was the beginning of his journey into the entertainment world. His parents really didn't understand, but as he got older, he knew he needed to move away from his hometown to become someone. And all his parents said, they weren't very supportive at that time, but all they told him was, please do not get naked to become famous. Then in 1998, after he had moved from his hometown, he was an adult, he had ended up entering this lottery to be in this show business related job. That's all they knew. He was so excited to win. He had never won anything in his life, and he had no idea that this was for a Japanese reality TV show. However, he was told that this was a show, and he was challenged to be alone and unclothed in this apartment until he won 1,000,000 yen or $8,000 in total from the mail-in sweepstakes, which was not an easy task. So he was blindfolded, he was brought into this apartment, he was asked to get naked, and he didn't really want to do so, of course, because of his parents, But that was part of the challenge, and so he ended up doing so.
はいどうもこんにちはナスビですというわけで今日は頑張りますんでよろしくお願いします当たりです当たりました
この強運芸人の名はナスビ。しかしこの時彼はまだ新企画の内容を知らない。
うわじゃあ行こうかこのまんまっすかいらっしゃい一生分の運を使い果たしたような感じがしないでもないんですけどね使い果たしちゃったか取って
ナスビが見たものは部屋。この殺風景な部屋の中にあるものはちゃぶ台、新しいハガキの山、ボールペン、電話、ラジオ、座布団、台所にはガスコンロ1つ、そしてトイレ、シャワー付きお風呂、エアコン、さらに全部最新号のたくさんの雑誌。すると
なんと
脱いで
はい
全部
マジパンツもですかうわいいんですか嘘それなんか違くないですかちょっといややばいっすよ本当に何を企んでるんですかこれは
Nasubi would soon be cut off from all outside communication or entertainment, only magazines to enter these sweepstakes. And he was in good spirits at first. He was laughing, saying that this was a ridiculous idea, but he was going to play along. Now, Nasubi knew he was being filmed. There was a camera in there, but he had no idea that everything he did was being seen live. No edits, no cuts for the next year and 3 months. And he also did not know it was going to take that long either. The challenge was to stay naked until he could win clothes through these sweepstakes. So he was filling out all of these forms during the day, hiding his, private area from the camera. And then when he believed he wouldn't be filmed, he would just be going about his normal day, walking around, not covering anything up, believing that all of that would be edited out because it wouldn't be funny, it wouldn't be worth the airtime. In fact, he believed this whole project would be shelved and never seen by anyone because he didn't think it would be very funny. In reality, he was walking around in the nude, living his life in that apartment, his very small life, and producers were covering his private area with an eggplant using a joystick while they streamed live. The audience, watching this man essentially be tortured and isolated, were aware that it was happening as they watched. They knew it was a live streamed segment. They would say that his face was quite long and that it looked like an eggplant as well, so his nickname became the Japanese word for eggplant. Not only was this live streamed, but it was then re-aired with different sound effects and 24/7 feeds to a viewership that often consisted of 17 million people, all while he believed no eyes were on him. Now, what he didn't know is that producers had rented the apartment next to his and would sneak into his room every morning to turn on the camera for the day. So Nasubi was going about his days trying to keep himself entertained, singing and dancing, and waiting for them to say he could finally be done. And as the months went on, this was months in this tiny apartment, having no food but what he won from sweepstakes, Nasubi was having no luck finding any clothes. But the food was what he really struggled with. Nasubi was given a few crackers by the producers each day at the beginning so he wouldn't starve to death. But that was only until he began winning things. And so as soon as he had his first food supplement, which was actually this strange jelly, those crackers ceased to come. Nasubi needed to fend for himself, but he couldn't hunt, he couldn't fish, nor could he ask for food or have it delivered. The only way to eat was to win, and he couldn't even choose what his prize would be. He had to pray that he was winning one of these measly magazine sweepstakes of the thousands that he was entering. And even worse, during his time there, when he was especially hungry, a delivery of food came to the wrong door, to his door mistakenly, and he had to send them away. One day, Nasubi won a bag of rice. He was so excited, but this was not cooked, and he had nothing to heat it in. So it was either don't eat the rice, continue to be hungry, or eat it raw. So he tried eating it raw, And then, finally, with the very little supplies he had, he made a heating container with the bag from the jelly that he had won previously and used a stove burner and ended up making some sort of rice porridge, but it was at least edible. Finally, he was able to eat something of substance, but as the months went by, his thoughts were only of survival. This was no longer a fun game to him. And while the live stream was watched for these months, some did have questions about the safety of Nasubi and his health. Producers of the show were doing interviews with journalists saying that Nasubi was free to leave at any time, that the door was unlocked. After 50 days had gone by, Nasubi had one food here and there, but not nearly enough to sustain him for long periods of time. You could tell he was getting a lot thinner, and this is when he began to win dog food, both wet and dry, and with little options, he began to eat it. And in fact, it tasted good because of the lack of nutrition he had been getting. At this point, you could tell he had very little strength, and this is when Nasubi began feeling very isolated and lonely, and he would write in his journal how he felt because he believed that this crew would at least be in the room with him to speak to him, but they would rarely be in there, and when they were not allowed to acknowledge him. So he ended up winning this stuffed seal, and he ended up talking to it like a friend, taking it on walks around the apartment. It was his only form of socialization. But after 5 months locked in this apartment, Nasubi was brought to another apartment. They told him this was to improve his luck, but it was actually because the media had leaked his location and there was paparazzi as well as fans outside trying to get a glimpse of him. And remember, he did not know that he was being shown to the world. So they had to keep this a secret from him, or they chose to do so. So when the producers came in to get him from the first apartment, he asked, "Is it over?" And he was really excited just to find out that he was going to be placed in a different location doing the same exact thing. At this point, Nasubi began to get very worried about his health. His hair was falling out in clumps, he was having frequent body aches, and he couldn't sleep. A doctor was sent in at one point to give him a full checkup and claim that he was in good health. And when Nasubi asked him if it was safe to keep going, the doctor kind of just brushed it off and told him he was young. Nasubi had been in a state of survival for over half a year at this point, all while acting positive and grateful on camera for every little thing that he won. Nasubi would officially win 1,000,000 yen after 335 days. He believed when he won, he would be released. However, he would be very wrong. The producers would enter his room, scaring Nasubi with party poppers and not telling him what in the world was going on.
じゃあもしかして100万になったってことですか？え？ちょっと待ってください。すいません。マジっすか？本当ですか？
Finally, he was told that he had won. He could not believe it. He was given back his clothes after almost a year. However, he was then blindfolded once again, and they took him on a car ride. He was then taken on a plane. Essentially, Nasubi was kidnapped, taken to Korea, and given a day full of food and fun. This was the first day he had out in the world in a long time. In fact, just breathing the fresh air was joyous to him. At the end of the day, Nasubi would be taken to a new apartment with new magazines. You could tell he was in distress as the producers told him that he needed to give up his clothes and that he had to survive on Korean sweepstakes prizes to make enough money to get an economy flight back to Japan. But Nasubi was never told how many yen he would need to reach to get to his goal, and so he was actually getting really good at the sweepstakes. He won very, very quickly and had enough for the economy flight back. So producers didn't end up telling him this. Instead, they changed it to a first-class flight and made him continue the show. However, Nasubi started to realize that he should have already won the amount of yen needed at this point. So, after 433 days, 15 months in isolation and feeling like he was in a pure survival state, he was once again taken out of the apartment. As they traveled with Nasubi still blindfolded, he was terrified of where they were going to take him next, if he was going to a different apartment, if he was ever going to be released. And when his blindfold was finally taken off, Nasubi found himself in another apartment. He began taking off his clothes like he was supposed to, and he didn't believe this was ever going to stop. However, that is when the walls started falling down around him, and he was in front of a live studio audience. They began to cheer for him, and he had no idea what was going on, how these people knew him. He froze on live TV, and he was naked. No one explained to him what was going on, and he still didn't know that this footage of him had been aired to the world. All he could say was, "My house fell down." He hadn't spoken to anyone in over a year, and so he was then told that they were all there to celebrate Nasubi reaching his goal. But it didn't hit him at that point what that meant and that they had been watching. All he heard was that he won, and so hopefully he would be released. But as they explained further, he was confused and asked, "So everyone saw me naked every week?" And when it was confirmed, that's when he said, "That's a bit wrong, isn't it?"
お邪魔します。
お邪魔します。
なんで笑ってるんですか。
検証生活ゴールしました。おめでとう。
Then they essentially had this press conference with Nasubi still naked on stage with only a pillow over his private area. And finally after that, he was free. But he was not okay. After he was freed, Nasubi would say that he had always loved making people laugh, but there's a difference in that and in being laughed at. His mother believed that he was being manipulated by the show. And Nasubi said that he could have escaped if he really wanted to. The door was unlocked, but that psychologically not causing trouble and staying put was the safest option for him. That it was a strange psychological state, and he lost the will to escape. He said when he was brought to Korea and put into another apartment, he thought his life was over at that point, that he would not survive this. And then at this point, what audiences didn't see when it was live streamed was a conversation between Nasubi and the producer, and Nasubi was telling him that he thought about ending his life several times before he had won the last time, and he basically did not want to do this. But the producer kept telling him, "I understand how you feel, but just hold on a little bit longer because you could grow into another level of human." So they were going back and forth for the next 3 hours, and eventually he was persuaded or manipulated into stripping naked once again and starting everything over. Nasubi explained that this producer was well known, and so when he first got the role and got to meet this producer, he was like a god to him. But after that conversation, he was the devil. In Korea, Nasubi believed he would die. He believed that if he wanted to escape, death would be the only way. However, he could not end his life, so he kept entering the sweepstakes, and the problem was he didn't even know Korean, which was the language of those magazines, so he had to teach himself a whole different language before he could win anything. Nasubi would later say that when he was brought in front of this live audience, he was so used to the isolation that this completely overwhelmed him. And when he got backstage, his first words were, "I was tricked, taken in." Now, Nasubi would be able to go back and see his family, but he believed that they would never forgive him because he had done the one thing they had asked him not to, be naked for fame. but he was welcomed with open arms and concerned loved ones. They truly knew that he was not okay. Nasubi said he had lost his faith in humanity, and he described himself as a broken man. His heart was wrapped in loneliness, and he didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to talk to people or make eye contact. And he said the only thing that he gained from this show was skills to survive. He knew that he was a survivor. He said he was asked on different talk shows for different interviews, but he could not keep up with what they wanted from him. They wanted this funny comedian, and that's just not what he was anymore. And he said even wearing clothes was difficult at first because he always overheated after being nude for so long. Now, in 2002, so 4 years after Nasubi was on the show, the program was canceled due to the government in Japan cracking down on torture-themed shows. However, this had already been filmed for 4 years with 20 challenges completed. But some of the older generation in Japan despised the show, and they thought it was torture and unfair, and they were the ones fighting against it. However, this would not be the end of torture for views. The show was moved online in 2009, and you could stream on number 2 Nihon Television. Then in 2009, the original host that I spoke to you about, Kunihiro, who was the one who was constantly joking about his weight, he was challenged to run the Tokyo Marathon. He would suffer a heart attack while doing so. Thankfully, he did survive. But all of this for what? For views, for an exciting TV show, for this human experiment with no regard to the mental or physical health of these real humans? This is when a documentary was created by Claire Titley called The Contestant. And this was to share Nasubi's side of the story and what he actually endured. And this documentary is why we have exactly how Nasubi was feeling during all of that and the truth behind it all. But the TV producer on the show said that if there was a god of TV, Nasubi gave them something great. That he had created the show realizing that there are celebrities out there, but if you drop any person in a situation like this and give them a challenge, all humans are entertaining. He said that before Nasubi, the critics were saying that this was just a travel show, so he wanted to prove them wrong. And that's when he locked this contestant in an apartment. And he didn't know if what he was doing to Nasubi was wrong. He confessed this, but he said he was obsessed. Producers and Nasubi's managers admitted to telling Nasubi that this video footage would never be aired, at least most of it. They would be cutting out so much of it where he was just living his life. The TV producer said that they did this to get Nasubi to stop paying attention to the camera. Producers admitted that if Nasubi had never won that race in the beginning, he would have died. And even after he won that first time, the producer said that they gave him the best day of his life and then placed him back in the apartment on purpose. So they gave him that high and would drop him low back again, which would be the best content for the show. The documentary has since been added to Hulu, and after this came out, many began to compare Nasubi's real-life experience to the popular movie that came out the same year that Nasubi was being live-streamed, The Truman Show. A movie I'm sure you have all watched about this man who doesn't know that his whole life is part of a massive TV set. Many do wonder if Nasubi is the reason that was created. But throughout the years, Nasubi struggled to find his purpose in life after this and to get back to the man that he once was. But in 2011, Fukushima, Japan had a horrible tsunami and earthquake that took the lives and the homes of many. Now, this was Nasubi's hometown. So he went there and he visited the supporters. He wanted to help them. And he ended up deciding to climb Mount Everest in their honor once everything had settled down. But as they reached the base camp to climb Mount Everest, they felt another earthquake that was happening in Nepal. And then an avalanche began on the mountain that they were on. Nasubi was said to immediately switch into rescue mode. He went to rescuing people on the mountain. 19 people died overall, but 150 were injured, and so many survived because of Nasubi. He then went on to Nepal to do rescue missions there, and it was said that in these moments, Nasubi finally realized why he had to go through what he did, what his purpose was, why he had to learn to survive. He said, "I realized that by helping those around you, you can find deep resources of inner strength." After all of this, the TV producer on the show contacted Nasubi and asked him for an interview. And the producer could feel Nasubi's anger towards him even after all of these years, but Nasubi said that he carried a grudge for him. But because of the show, he learned that humans cannot exist alone. The producer was claiming that if Nasubi needed him to end his life so Nasubi could have closure, he would consider it. They ended up talking, and together they raised money for Nasubi to climb Mount Everest after he didn't get to the first time. This time, Nasubi got to create his own challenge and win his own challenge, all while surrounded by support, and he climbed the mountain with his friends. He said that once he got to the top, he felt gratitude to all of those who have supported him. But he has said that the worst point in his life was at the peak of his fame, and now he is free to do what he wants. I think that this survival story is important even today. From then to now, reality TV has had damaging results of real lives from the aftermath of these shows or what happens during them. From mental health struggles, bullying, loss of jobs, death threats, this show appears to be the beginning of it all. With contestants desperately doing whatever was needed or asked of them from these shows for fame, and with producers going overboard for entertainment, and with audiences loving every minute of it and encouraging the continuation by giving it views. Many, even today, say to these contestants or reality TV stars who were struggling while on the show or afterwards that they chose this path. They chose to be on the show, and they deserve every negative thing that comes with it. But even in 1998, when some began to point out the torture and safety concerns of Nasubi, the response was that it was his choice to be there, that he could get out anytime. Unfortunately, just like in kidnapping cases, it's not that simple. When you enter a survival mode, it no longer seems as easy to just walk out. His time on the show was nothing like he was described was going to happen, and it continued far longer than he wanted. While deprived of nutrients, he was not in his right state of mind, and he was not being supported or even spoken to by anyone. And then once he was released from the show and he was put in front of a live audience, that support wasn't there to make sure that Nasubi was okay. They were treating him more like a monkey who had just escaped the zoo, rather than a broken man who needed help. Thankfully, his family was beside him during that time. But even today, the support and the reintegration back into reality after being on these reality TV shows rarely occurs. Contestants are left to fend for themselves in the midst of turmoil and a complete change of their life after the producers got the ratings and the money that they wanted out of them. There is no help afterwards. Nasubi spoke about wanting to end his life due to this show, and heartbreakingly enough, this isn't uncommon for reality TV contestants. We've been seeing a rise in suicides among these contestants, which should be ringing alarm bells that something needs to change, but it doesn't appear that it has gotten any better since the beginning in Japan with Nasubi. I don't think that this is as simple as, well, he chose to go on this show and that is what he was given. He was given the opportunity of an audience and now he is famous. And I don't think just because this is a TV show, they should be able to get away with this amount of torture. But what do you think? Do you have a strong opinion on reality TV show contestants? And have you seen the downfall of their mental health, especially after being on these shows? What can we do to help them? What needs to be implemented by these TV stations, by these producers to make sure that they are going to be okay afterwards? Nobody deserves to be tortured and to be put in this horrific state of mind that they don't even want to live anymore. No one deserves that, no matter whether they're on a TV show for fame or not. I don't think it's fair to put people in a state of survival, fearing that their lives would end or that they would have to end their lives to make it stop just for ratings and views. Have you heard about this documentary? I highly recommend watching it. Have you heard about Nasubi? Did you watch any of this? Did you hear about it when it was happening? Let me know all the details down below because I hadn't heard about it until this documentary came out. So I'm so happy that they did this and they showed his side of the story, and I just hope that this brings a positive change to reality TV. So don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces.